I used to think silence kept the peace. In our family, quiet meant survival, holding your breath while someone else took the air. For years, I let my sister talk over me, laugh at me, decide who I should be. I let her shape the story because it was easier than fighting. I told myself she didn't mean to hurt me, that cruelty wrapped in love was still love somehow. But standing there that day, in front of everyone I cared about, hearing her voice cut through my wedding vows like a knife, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't shock, it was recognition, the sound of a wound I'd been pretending not to hear for half my life. My name is Thalassa Green, and for the first time, I realized silence isn't grace, it's surrender. They think I'll swallow this, like I always do. They have no idea what's coming. Morning light slid through the fog, pale and cold against the window glass. I poured coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used for years and wrote a line at the top of my notepad. Forgiveness is a decision, not a feeling. The words didn't feel true, but I kept them anyway. The sea was calm, steady in a way I hadn't been for weeks. The phone buzzed against the counter, landing at 3 p.m. Don't start the rehearsal dinner without me. Even in text. Rhiannon's voice carried its usual precision, sharp enough to cut through air. I felt that old pressure behind my ribs, the one that always returned when she did. I thought of my father, how he'd taught us to swim before we could spell our own names, how he'd collapsed one summer afternoon, and how Rhiannon's words afterward had carved something permanent into me. You just watched him die. From that day on, she wasn't my sister anymore. Not in the way that mattered. The knock at the door came like a reprieve. Liam stood there with a paper bag of warm pastries, sea wind in his hair. He kissed my forehead and smiled. I tried to match it. You haven't met Rhiannon. I told him, half a joke, half a warning. Inside, something tightened. I wasn't afraid she'd hate him. I was afraid she'd see how happy I was and find a way to break it. That night, at the little restaurant by the water, candles flickered against gold light, and the scent of salt drifted in through cracked windows. Laughter fell quiet when she arrived. Red dress, perfume heavy enough to mask the ocean. She lifted her glass. To my sister Thalassa, for finding love in the shallow end. Liam's gaze dropped to his plate. Someone chuckled too loudly. I smiled the way people do when there's no safe way not to. The wine spilled, a crimson stain across a white tablecloth, bright and spreading. Outside, waves struck the shore with an odd, rising rhythm. Tomorrow, I told myself, she can't hurt me anymore. At least that's what I believed then. The cursor blinked against a half-written lecture slide, Trauma and Family Systems. I stared at the title until the words lost meaning. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built a career explaining how pain travels through bloodlines, yet I couldn't fix the fractures in my own. Memory is cruel that way. One moment I was in my office, and the next, I was back in Port Townsend, running barefoot across wet sand with Rhiannon just ahead of me. She always led, I always followed. That's how it was until the day everything stopped. Our father fell to the ground mid-laughter, the sea breeze cutting colder than before. I remember the phone slipping from my shaking hands, the world going quiet. At the funeral, Rhiannon's voice was ice. You froze. You let him die. Since then, she's never trusted me to hold anything fragile. The waves outside my window pulled me back to now, to the first day I met Liam. I'd gone walking during a storm, restless and reckless. The tide caught me off guard, and before fear became panic, he was there, calm and certain, pulling me back to shore. You panic fast. Good thing I don't, he teased. And somehow that became our beginning. He liked to tell small stories, gentle ones. How he once found a glass bottle with a child's letter inside. If you find this, it means the world is still kind. He said he wanted to believe it. So did I. One evening, while folding laundry, I opened a drawer and found a hospital ID card. William Barrett, ER Department, Seattle. The photo was him, younger, sharper around the edges. When I asked, he said only, "That was another life," and closed the drawer with quiet finality. I told myself love didn't need every answer. I told myself silence was trust. But lying beside him that night, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, I realized silence also sounds a lot like a secret waiting to break. A week before the wedding, Rhiannon decided to help. That meant criticizing the florist, rearranging seating charts, and tightening every screw until no one could breathe. The house smelled like stress and her perfume. Over breakfast, she spoke without looking up from her tablet. I talked to someone from Seattle General. They remember him. I froze. You had no right. Her tone didn't change. I had every right. You always needed saving. The words burned deeper than they should have. I left before she could see how much. Outside, the wind stung my face as I hit the sand with my fists until the ache dulled. She's wrong, I thought, but part of me still believes her. That night, Liam sat by the window, eyes on the dark water. Is there something you're not telling me? I asked. He paused, still looking at the horizon. There's always something we can't say. Not yet. I rested my head on his shoulder, pretending that was enough. The silence between us was heavier than the storm outside. Later, I heard Rhiannon's voice down the hall, low and clipped. Yes, send me the files. I'll deal with it myself. In the reflection of her window, two faces stared back, one lit by moonlight, one lost in shadow. For the first time, I wondered if either of them still belonged to my sister. Fog clung to the cliffs like breath, the chapel above the ocean gleaming pale against the gray. Inside, the air smelled of salt and lilies. My mother's hands trembled as she adjusted my veil. She whispered that Rhiannon would behave today. I smiled thinly. That would be a first. Through the narrow window, I saw her outside, red coat bright in the mist, speaking to a man with a camera. Who invited the press? I asked. Mother frowned. I thought he was one of Liam's friends. My stomach dropped. Even before the music started, I felt the storm coming. The organ began, slow and reverent. I walked down the aisle beneath stained glass light, my heart steadying when Liam's eyes met mine. He looked calm, like he could hold the whole world still. Then the priest spoke. If anyone objects to this union, and the sound of Rhiannon's heels cracked the silence. Her voice was clear, cold. This man is under investigation for killing a patient. You're marrying a liar. Thalassa. Gasps. Camera flash. Liam didn't move. He looked at her, then at me, steady, resigned. I whispered, "Tell me it's not true." He said softly, "Not the way she thinks." Rhiannon lifted her phone. Dr. William Barrett, ER surgeon involved in pediatric fatality case. My throat closed. William Barrett, my Liam. He turned and walked away before I could reach him. The chapel dissolved into noise, mother crying, guests whispering. I stood frozen until the door slammed. Outside, through the glass, Rhiannon leaned into a reporter's microphone, calm as ever. Inside, I sat down hard, breath gone, the ring slipping from my hand. It hit the stone floor with a small metallic echo. One last note before everything went silent. 2 days later, Astoria was drowning in rain. Every newsfeed carried Liam's face. Local bride's husband exposed as disgraced doctor. I muted the TV, the silence heavier than the headlines. The university emailed suggesting a leave of absence. Friends stopped calling. I wrote in my journal instead. Everyone wants me to be ashamed. No one asks if I'm in pain. By nightfall, I couldn't bear it. I drove to Seattle, windshield wipers beating like a pulse. The hospital still had his name on an old plaque. A nurse remembered him. He saved more people than anyone here. One mistake, and they buried him alive. I found the file, faded pages, typewritten grief. The patient was a boy, 8 years old. Mother, Rhiannon Green Barclay. The paper shook in my hands. Wind from the open window scattered it across the floor like feathers. I saw him in my mind, younger, desperate, sweat beating under harsh lights, whispering, "I'm sorry," as monitors went flat. He hadn't killed anyone. He'd tried to save her child and failed. Rhiannon had seen it, known it, and turned her heartbreak into vengeance. That night, I walked to the pier, rain soaking through my dress. I threw the wedding ring into the sea, but it caught on a coil of rope and hung there, gleaming faintly in the dark. Love wasn't gone. It was only caught between truth and the lies we told to survive. 2 weeks after the wedding, rain clung to Astoria like punishment. Reporters still parked near the corner, waiting for a glimpse of the disgraced bride. The university's email arrived that morning. You are placed on indefinite leave. I read it twice before closing the laptop. The phone rang soon after. My mother's voice was gentle, careful. Rhiannon just wanted to protect you. I laughed under my breath. She protected me from happiness. I packed a small suitcase before I could think better of it. The house felt stripped of air, of color, of belonging. Outside, the ocean roared, gray and endless. I drove north toward Seattle, wipers beating against the windshield, my father's voice filling the car from an old cassette. I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky. It was like he was giving me permission to go. The city greeted me with fog and the smell of rusted docks. Near the harbor stood a temporary medical tent, its canvas flapping in the wind. I saw him there, Liam, sleeves rolled up, bandaging a boy's scraped arm. His voice was low and steady. Hold still, kiddo. You're braver than most adults I know. When the boy left, I stepped forward. You're still saving people. He smiled faintly. They took my name, not my hands. We sat on crates beneath a leaking light. You should have told me, I said. He sighed. I was going to. I wanted you to love me before you knew what I'd lost. Then, quietly. That night, she was there, Rhiannon, her son. I did everything I could. He handed me a faded photocopy. At the bottom of the page, do not release file, signed, Rhiannon Green. My chest tightened. The truth hadn't been buried by strangers. It had been sealed by my own sister. When he rose to leave, the rain thickened. You can hate her, he said, or you can save her. Either way, the truth's yours now. I stood there long after he was gone, the storm swallowing everything except the sound of my heartbeat. A week later, I returned home. Dust coated every surface, and the ocean outside looked calm in that eerie, waiting way. Silence is never peaceful when you know what it's hiding. I was pouring cold coffee when the knock came. An older man stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. Paul Hastings, he said, former counsel at Seattle General. He handed me an envelope. He asked me to send this if the truth ever mattered again. Inside were copies of sealed hospital records. At the bottom of the page, patient's mother requested this statement remain sealed indefinitely. Signed, Rhiannon Green Barclay. My hands trembled. I sat at the table as rain traced lines down the glass. In my mind, I saw her again, Rhiannon in a hospital corridor, hollow-eyed, a man's hand on her shoulder. We'll handle this, he must have said, and she'd let them. I lit a candle. The flame reflected in the mirror, showing two versions of me, the sister who stayed silent and the woman who wouldn't anymore. All my life, I thought silence was strength. I whispered. But silence built her prison and mine. I called her. She answered on the first ring. If you come here, she said softly, bring rain. I deserve it. That night I drove to the harbor, clouds heavy, sea dark and waiting. I held the letter out the window. The wind tore it from my hand, sending it into the waves. Truth isn't light, I thought. It's a storm. And tomorrow, I'll walk into it. The wind was so strong it carried the rain sideways, needling against my skin as I walked down the empty pier. The sky hung low and bruised, the sea roaring beneath the wooden planks that had once been dressed for my wedding. Now it was only wreckage and echoes. Rhiannon was already there, standing at the edge, hair plastered to her face. No coat, no umbrella, just the rain swallowing her whole. For a second, I saw the sister I once followed into the waves, before the storm made us strangers. I held the crumpled letter in my hand, The ink already bleeding. There was no hello, no apology, just the truth between us, heavy and unspoken. I lifted the paper. You signed this. You buried him. Her voice cracked through the rain. I couldn't face what I saw. My son dying. His hands on him. I needed to hate someone. Anger burned through me, sharp and electric. You destroyed my life because you couldn't live with yours. Rhiannon fell to her knees, fingers clutching the wet wood. He held my son when he died. He said, "I'm sorry." I hear it every night. The storm screamed around us. I knelt, gripping her shoulders. He wasn't saying he was guilty. He was saying he was sorry it happened. Her sobs broke open the sky. I threw the letter into the sea and watched it dissolve into the black water. No more secrets. Not from him. Not from us. She kicked off her heels, letting them slide into the tide, the waves claiming them without a sound. We held each other, soaked, trembling, until the thunder faded and the clouds began to thin. When we finally turned toward the car, the rain stopped. Moonlight spilled across the pier, silver and quiet. I looked back at the ocean, at everything it had taken and everything it had given back. It was never the sea that drowned us. It was silence. A month later, the world finally caught up to the truth. In Seattle, the hospital held a small press conference. The same lobby that once displayed his photo under a headline of disgrace now gleamed beneath fluorescent lights as the administrator read from a prepared statement. Dr. William Barrett acted appropriately. Prior allegations were unfounded. Reporters filled the front row, pens ready. One of them asked if Liam intended to sue for defamation. He shook his head, his voice calm. No, I only wanted my name back, not revenge. The simplicity of it silenced the room more than any speech could have. That evening, the story reached every major outlet. Rhiannon appeared on the local news, hair pulled back, no makeup, dressed in a plain white blouse. Pain made me blind. Truth made me see again, she said, voice steady, but eyes glistening. The next day, she resigned from her firm, packed what she owned into her car, and drove back to Oregon. By the time she arrived, the sign above the small seaside clinic read Barrett Memorial Clinic. Morning light spilled through the windows as Liam and I painted the walls a soft blue. When the door opened, Rhiannon stepped inside with a bouquet of wildflowers. Liam turned, gentle as ever. "You don't owe me anything," he said. She met his gaze, her voice trembling. "Then let me work for it." Days later, she stood behind the reception desk, sleeves rolled, hands unsteady but willing. She wiped down tables, bandaged cuts, listened more than she spoke. One little girl grinned up at her. "You look tired." Rhiannon smiled, soft and real. "It's the best kind of tired." A year later, peace came softly, like the tide creeping over the sand. Morning light spilled through the windows of the Barrett Memorial Clinic, turning the sea outside to gold. I opened my sea journal and wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It releases its weight." Above the door hung a new sign, Green Barrett Foundation for Family Healing. The ceremony was small. Liam spoke with quiet gratitude, sunlight warming his face. In the back row, Rhiannon sat in her pale blue uniform, a bouquet of sea daisies in her hands. When he called her up, she smiled through tears. "I used to think power was control. Now I know it's humility." Afterward, she and I walked along the shore where everything had once broken apart. The air was soft, the waves steady. "You look happy," she said. I smiled. "So do you." Inside the clinic, our wedding rings caught the sun beside her old red heels, locked behind glass. I closed my journal on a new page. The ocean keeps its secrets, but some truths. It finally returns.